Jeremy, before I go on, is that the Bitcoin white paper in the background? Hanging on
It
the
is,
wall?
sir.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can tell by that. It took me a moment, but I just noticed the graphic that, and I have it on my wall. I'm like, is that the same thing? And it is.
Oh,
I can't
nice,
read
nice,
it,
nice.
but
This is a foundational transformation we see happening in the economy.
DeFi and blockchain are redefining business, the economy, and our society.
Hey everybody, what's up? It's great to be back. This is Megan Guy, your co-host of Redefined. I'm here with my fantastic co-host, Jeremy Almond. Jeremy, how are you doing?
Hey, what's up, Megan? What's up? It's great to be here, and I'm super, super excited about our next guest, Alex Tapscott. Alex, what's up, man?
How are you guys? Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. This is actually a fun episode. I'm super psyched because I've been following your content for a long time. So a little fun fact, I know you've been in the blockchain space for eons. You've written two books that are very, very well known. And you started your career off in financial services. And I remember when Paystand got started and it was early days and we were fundraising, 8-9 years ago, people didn't understand what blockchain was. And you had this early TED Talk, I don't know, what was that, 7 or 8 years ago, man?
Yeah.
That TED Talk was this intro into blockchain and financial services in particular. So is financial services how you got involved in blockchain? Was that your aha moment? And kind of how have you seen it since that?
It was actually on a father-son ski trip with my dad in Mont Tremblant, Quebec. When I first started to really get into it. So over a ribeye steak and a bottle of red wine, he asked me, what are you looking at these days? Like, what are you interested in? I said, I'm actually interested in this thing called Bitcoin. And he said, oh, that's so interesting because I'm interested in Bitcoin too. And I was like, you are? And he said, yeah, of course I am. Now, for context, my dad is a very prolific business author. He's written over 15 books about business and technology, some very influential like Wikonomics, the digital economy, paradigm shift, and the like. And he said, yeah, I'm doing a research project. We're looking at how technology is enabling new forms of global problem solving. And one of the technologies we're trying to understand a lot better is Bitcoin. Do you want to run a research project for our initiative? And I said, sure. That eventually turned into a project called the Bitcoin Governance Network. And that eventually led to other research that I did with him, which eventually led to his agent reaching out and saying, hey, I've caught wind of the fact that you and Alex are doing all this research into blockchain and Bitcoin. Do you think there's enough meat on the bone here to write a book? Oh, and by the way, I think the idea of Tapscott and Son is a really compelling sales pitch. And this struck me as kind of a great segue. I had no idea what was going to happen on the other end of this book. I had no idea if this was even going to take off, or if the technology was really viable, or if it was just a flash in the pan. But they say if you're offered a seat on a rocket ship, you don't ask which seat, you just sort of get on and hold on and hope for the best, basically. I've done a lot of different things. I was an early stage advisor to a couple of projects, blockchain-based projects that ended up doing really well. And I launched a VC fund that raised $20 million and eventually returned about 50 to investors over a 2-year time horizon. So great exits across the board. And I've continued to write about the topic, and I've got a new book out called Web3, Charting the Internet's Next Economic and Cultural Frontier. So basically, my hope is that this new book, in a way, will help to set the conversation about Web3 in the same way that blockchain revolution did for the people that you were talking to, Jeremy and Megan, 8 or 9 years ago, who were like, what is this stuff and why should I care as an executive in XYZ industry, or as a journalist, or as a regulator, or as a person who's just curious about the future? That's the purpose, which is education, basically.
Well, I love it. I literally just finished the new book, so Web3 is great. Maybe before we get in, there's some big topics in Web3 and kind of broader in the book. I'm curious what you've seen. The three of us have been in space a long time. You started off in financial services as kind of was the anchoring point. What's changed in 10 years, basically, in the financial services side, which was maybe the first mega use case, then versus now? How are you seeing DeFi and blockchain in, let's call it, the first big use case?
Yeah, well, I'll say that I kind of buried the lead, but basically when I first started to look into it, I thought I was investigating a new asset, something that had value and could increase in value. But what I learned after spending some time was that actually I was investigating a new technology, that the underlying technology of blockchain was really the real pony in this race. A blockchain basically represents the basis for a new internet. So for 30 years, we've had an internet of information, a way to move and store and manage information. But we haven't had a way to sort of move and store value or assets peer to peer because we weren't able to solve the double spend problem. How do you ensure that when you move some information that's supposed to be value to someone online, that you don't still hold a copy, that you can't create a duplicate? And because that was such a difficult problem to solve, throughout the first 30 years of the web, we relied entirely on middlemen, intermediaries, to establish trust and perform all the business logic online. And with blockchain, we had a new medium, a new platform to replace those middlemen and enable people and businesses to transact, to move value, and to automate business processes without the need for a middleman. And to me, like, that is a fundamentally revolutionary innovation.
Yeah, for sure. What's so interesting is it's both a technology transformation and it enables a fundamental economic revolution. I mean, that's a huge reason why we started Paystand all those years back. Alex, could you actually describe what makes Web3 unique and different versus the Web 1 and 2 that we know so well?
The idea of Web3 is that the first era of the web, Web 1, was the read web, a way to consume content digitally. Web 2 was the read-write web, basically meaning a way to consume content, but also write to the web, upload your own content, find community, share, etc. And Web 3 is the read-write-own web, a way to consume content, share and upload content, but also own your digital assets, own your digital creations, being able to control and own your data and your digital identity or markers of your digital identity, and to use that as a way to gain power online and to make, move value and to potentially build wealth. And I think that that's like the fundamental innovation of Web3.
I do think there's a perception issue that's critically important around adoption and speed of adoption, and like where some of these incumbent players, and how they place their bets, and governments for that matter. How, I imagine when you wrote your first book, you weren't anticipating, the number of events that we've seen with, the Terra and Luna collapse and FTX and, finance and money laundering. It's easy to point at those and say, like, these are bad actors, they're spoiling it for everyone else. But where's kind of the happy medium, or how do you think about sort of the pace of change and the right way to adopt a new technology and a new financial system, when obviously some of those bad use cases are really destructive and undermine actually a lot of the great arguments for moving this forward faster?
Is there something inherent in this technology that makes it easier to commit crimes or to do fraud, right? And I think that's the question that people are really interested in. Now, the answer you typically get is crypto is used by criminals. Well, most of the data actually says that crypto is not used by criminals any more frequently than cash or any other medium of exchange, or the banking system for that matter. Oligarchs and despots have been using financial institutions to launder money in quantities that would make even the biggest crypto fraudster blush for centuries. So that's something that's been going on for a long time. But there is something interesting about crypto assets, which is that it makes it easier to sort of launch, not like to use the asset class for crime per se, but rather to launch a scam. So you could make the case that Web 1, like the .com era, democratized access to information, but it also democratized access to disinformation. And that created a lot of problems. Web 2, the read-write web, what we think of as the web of user-generated content and social media, democratized access to publishing, gave everyone a way to publish information, but it also democratized the publishing of hate speech and incorrect information and all sorts of stuff that I think has sown civil discord and created a lot of problems, right, in the world. And it's also done a lot of great stuff as well, but it's also done that. So Web3 democratizes ownership, and it democratizes a way for people to launch new businesses and organizations. It also makes it a lot easier to launch new scams. And that's the reality. It's the duality of this technology. And I think it's something that as an industry, we need to take very seriously. On the other hand, laws exist against financial fraud. Like those are pretty like cut and dry. When it comes to the publishing of misinformation and hate speech, most countries have some limit on that, but in general, it's protected, right? It's protected speech. Whereas it's always illegal to defraud someone and to misrepresent them in a financial, scheme or something like that. So, I think that we have the tools at our disposal to address these issues, but they are issues that do exist in this space.
In the newest book, when you're talking about Web3, one of the big ideas to me that you talked a lot about was property rights. So why does digital property rights matter? Why is that foundational to Web3? And foundational to sort of the decentralizing of the read-write ownership side of Web3.
Yeah, the question of ownership is fundamental. And in fact, I think that everything we're talking about is about ownership. So if you own Bitcoin, you custody it yourself. You can prove, on chain that you own it. You have a wallet address. You got your private key of the rest of it. You can store it off, whatever, using a seed phrase. Like it's ownership. Now that's a very kind of technical kind of definition, but basically, blockchains enable us to crystallize digital property rights in a way that has never existed before. So since 2009, since the collapse of the economy collapses, all the banks, kind of go under and they get saved. And then out of this emerges this kind of new economy. And the new economy is dominated by platforms. And the platforms become enormously powerful by capturing and harvesting user data. Harvesting meaning using it to, sell new products and services or to sell that data directly to advertisers who go on to sell them more stuff. And data, again, a cliche, but I think cliches can sometimes be true. Data is the new oil, right? And if that's true, then these platforms are the industrial plant and equipment that are using that oil to build wealth. And I think that that's been the model for 15 years. And since that period of time, whether you're looking at the so-called Magnificent Seven or the FANG stocks or whatever, it's about 10, 12 trillion dollars of market capitalization has been created largely, not exclusively, but largely due to the monetization of user-generated content and data, basically. And that is because we had no way for the people who created all that value in those networks, social networks on platforms, to actually capture that value and monetize it themselves. So it's sort of a form of digital serfdom in a way, where you're creating this thing that has all the value, and then you're basically giving it away as tribute to the wealthy landowner, in this case, the platform. And in exchange, you get something back. Serfs got something back. They got they didn't get killed or whatever. But in our case, we get access to some free services online. I remember the early days of Facebook in 2004, and it was really fun, and it seemed kind of harmless. But I think in retrospect, this trade feels more like a Faustian bargain, like a deal with the devil, where we unwittingly have ceded sovereignty of our digital selves to the point where there's a virtual you out there, but you don't know who owns it. It's owned by every company you've ever interacted with, every website you've ever visited, every government you've ever handed your data to, and that virtual you knows you better than you know you, and that means that data can end up in the wrong hands, and it means that you can't monetize it. So the idea of ownership is ownership and control. Ownership and control of our digital selves and of our assets. And I think that that's something that clearly has value in financial services, but also in a wide range of industries and other sort of cultural and social realms that I explore in the new book, Web3.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think it's clear property rights are foundational to civil society and equal access, right? Whether it's access to land or access to, our own, censorship-resistant data. I'm curious, maybe to both of you. You've both been investors. You both looked at this space. Where are the use cases that are actually working in Web3? Megan was sort of talking about some of the challenges in the space. Where is this actually working right now? Because it's not like land rights are, by and large in physical space put on the blockchain at large traction points. But there are places where this is actually working, right?
Something everybody wants in the world is a way to have a US dollar bank account. And that's something that most people can't access. And, it's a privilege of people who live in the States and Canada and, some European countries or whatever. And so that's why the thing that's found the fastest product market fit, ironically, in a way, is US dollar stablecoins. US dollar stablecoins have market value of $130 billion of circulating supply. According to Circle's annual report from last year, USDC, which is one of several, it's the second largest, but it's not the biggest, was used by over 100 million people last year and did more transaction volume than the whole Visa network, just on the Ethereum platform. So that's evidence to me of clear product market fit for a thing that everybody wants. Now, I think what's interesting about DeFi is that everybody wants a way to move and store dollars. But once they have that, then what do they want? Well, they want other kinds of banking services, not just a way to move money, but a way to store money, access credit, trade, invest, insure, all that stuff that we take for granted. And I think that what's so interesting about DeFi and stablecoins, DeFi is the most one that still remains one of the most exciting frontiers within Web3.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is just for the listener, I didn't ask Alex to plug DeFi, so nice.
You can build user-owned networks for finance and other applications, but you can also build user-owned networks for physical plant and equipment, for infrastructure, basically. And those kinds of networks can be user-owned computing networks, where people pool their GPUs into a massive cloud and get paid for doing so. It can be user-owned networks of dash cams, where people record mapping data and put it into a commons, and that data gets sold and they get compensated for it. So that's like Hive Mapper. Or it could be decentralized networks for internet telephony and connectivity using internet hotspots and so forth. So these all exist. And to me, this area of decentralized physical infrastructure, which by some estimates is set to grow to $3 trillion by the end of the decade, remains one of the most compelling things.
The infrastructure is really interesting just because it goes back to some of the Web 1.0 roots. And Web 1.0, just as a philosophy, was much more decentralized, I think, as a concept. And so you're touching infrastructure more.
I agree with that. And right now, 3/4 of the entire cloud market is controlled by 3 companies. And so the idea that all of the applications and every business that uses the internet, now people still run their own servers. That's not all the computing, but this one segment, huge segment, is 3 businesses. It's sort of antithetical to the whole concept of the web, in my opinion.
100%.
Yeah, I'm not at 100%. I think, to me, I think the biggest issue that needs to be solved beyond, some of the legal stuff that we've talked about and, clarifying regulatory framework and ensuring that people can have the same level of confidence that their assets will be where they said they were, in a decentralized versus the centralized financial system we're in now, is really just around ease of use, right? So it sounds great to say decentralize everything. Everyone should be, an individual, make their own decisions, take ownership of your own footprint and, your data, your infrastructure, everything else. But at the end of the day, I just really question, and I haven't seen a ton of great use cases that say people actually do want to go that route, right? And keep track of all these different tokens, have to manage multiple wallets. At the end of the day, I think we're really good at saying as a society, we want all these rights and, if being in America, individualism is so centric, right? But when push comes to shove, I think most of us actually just want something that works consistently, that we trust, and that's relatively straightforward, right?
It's true that actually when a new technology emerges, it's usually pretty useless for the existing market of the most valuable customers. So crypto assets are a good example of this. One of the benefits of crypto is that you can custody it yourself. And you can be your own bank and you can invest it all in DeFi protocols and this, that, and the other, and you can move it to your family around the world. For most financial bank customers in the United States, these are not features. These are bugs.
Exactly.
It's what? I can't control whatever 20 grand or 50 grand of assets on my phone with a seed phrase. Are you nuts? And so that's why, in a way, it's sometimes very difficult. for existing companies, like even very well-run firms, to figure out how to embrace this stuff. Because like a lot of customers of JP Morgan, to the extent that they are asking about this, are asking about it as an investment asset that JP Morgan can help them invest in. They're not looking for ways to custody their own coins. They're saying, hey, I'm a rich customer of JP Morgan. I'd like to buy some Bitcoin or some ETH or something and put it in my portfolio. But I'm just saying, like in general, the best customers of the big firms aren't necessarily knocking down the door trying to do this. Today, you're right that we need a bridge for a lot of users to help them with this. And that there's probably a limit right now in the world of people who are comfortable custodying their own assets. Like maybe, I don't know what that number is. I'm going to make a number up. It's 500 million people, which is to say it's about 7.5% of the population. There are a lot of people who are digitally native, young people living in places like India, for whom this is very normal because the alternative is keeping cash under your mattress. So like, this is not like, so for us, you're right. As a customer of JP Morgan and living in San Francisco or Toronto or something, yes. But for a lot of people, they've already gotten over that hurdle. Then the next dimension of this is making it easier to use or creating ways to like, make the whole experience better. So like, I think that in the same way that the browser kind of helped to onboard lots of people to the internet, the wallet is helping to onboard lots of people to Web3. But the current wallet is like Mosaic, whereas the future wallet is going to be more like Google Chrome. And I think that figuring out a way to build like a software interface for Web3 is very, very important.
You need to see that real leap forward in value delivered to people. And kind of from where I sit in the developed world, I think it needs to be more than control over your own data. I think a lot of us as investors got very excited a couple of years ago that like maybe we were close, and we haven't really seen many of those businesses, I think, kind of accelerate in the way that folks had hoped. And so there do seem to still be some bigger barriers.
We might be in the trough of disillusionment, right? As kind of part of it. So, in the normal innovator cycle. And Alex, I'd almost add on to this, which is you were talking about like young digitally native is the next kind of frontier and I think that's true, right? And I often think about like the evolution of cloud is sort of that way. It was like super, super scary in the business landscape until it wasn't. And then like, software ate the world. And now like software is table stakes if it's not cloud. I think one area the three of us are looking at a lot is where are the corporations? Because I think not everybody might be aware of where companies are actually involved today. Like I've seen a bunch of statistics that somewhere like 40, 50% of all, major corporations have some kind of blockchain infrastructure. So yes, it's young people. Yes, it's bridge technology, but there might be stuff cooking behind the scenes that maybe only some of us get to see. And so I'm wondering if either one of you have any thoughts about what the builders are doing behind the scenes in the companies that are actually pushing the ball forward, even if it's not quite as visible to sort of mainstream yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that most smart enterprises have a Web3 strategy. The data is that about 50% of Fortune 100 companies have invested in Web3. Now, just to be clear, like there's a wide range in what that looks like. In some instances, they've hired a head of Web3 to like do some skunk works and kick tires and stuff like that. But in other cases, it's something much, much, much more meaningful. And I'm really interested in the companies that are doing really meaningful stuff. And it's a really wide range, like PayPal's launched PYUSD, which has actually grown really quickly. People say it's only $150 million. Well, I mean, it started from zero 100 days ago, and it's already at $150 million. So like, I'm of the view that that is going to be really material to that business. Starbucks, which is basically a financial services company masquerading as a coffee shop, right? Like they have one of the most widely used payment apps and loyalty programs in the world. Of course, they're interested in tokens for their community as a way to access services or as a as a form of loyalty point. Nike has made $400 million from the sale and ongoing royalties from the sale of digital goods and collectibles, and plenty of other brands have done that as well with more modest scale, Gucci, Dolce & Gabbana, and the rest. And like, that's interesting to me for a few reasons. Like the idea that someone would spend $1,000 on a digital purse is like kind of stupid in my opinion, or more, $10,000. But I'm more interested in the idea that we're spending more time online. More of our time is spent in immersive virtual worlds. Kids used to have the third space concept. Basically, like you've got your school, you got your home, and then your third space. And third space used to be the arcade or the movie theater, or like the park, or whatever. And now the third space for a lot of kids is the internet. And so, you're interested in the presentation of self online and your credibility and everything that matters to your identity. So more of your spend is going to be spent there. We already know that from like Roblox and games that kids will spend tons of money. So I see that as a really interesting frontier for a lot of cultural brands. Even like big companies like FedEx, for example. Like FedEx was a sponsor of my book tour. They've been a member of the Blockchain Research Institute, the think tank that I co-founded with my dad a few years ago. And FedEx, we had the CEO, Fred Smith, on a panel 6 years ago saying that he's building this whole supply chain around this idea of blockchain. Now, that's going to take a long time. That's not like dipping into the Web3 toolkit and pulling out some nifty token concept. That's deep reinvention of the business, but it's happening across so many different industries.
The other place I think where we've seen really strong traction so far is on the gaming side of things, where the notion of digital assets is like inherent kind of to what folks have built and what they're used to doing in their experience. And while many of the transactions now, can happen in a Web3 environment, it feels like the same sort of game and experience to the user, right? They don't have to open a wallet or think through, different tokens for different games. And we're seeing more sonic connectivity and fungibility in that like Web3 gaming space. I mean, it's still really early days. Like I wouldn't say that's hit escape velocity yet, but I think I'm seeing more momentum there than in some of the other areas.
Yeah, 100%. I think, maybe going back to what's sitting on the wall for me, the enterprise use case is an important driver, I think, of blockchain adoption in general. It does create real and tangible value. At the end of the day, many of us got involved, I think, for philosophical reasons.
Revolutions are never straightforward. They're never like a linear path from A to B. And last year certainly saw a lot of bumps in the road for people who were real enthusiasts around blockchain and crypto and Web3. Tell us sort of the other side of that story. What are some of the really exciting markers of progress that you saw in 2022 that maybe didn't get as much attention as they should have, given the attention that was being spent on bad actors and hype cycles and the speculative side of the things?
Last year, we had, to Megan's point, like FTX, Terra Luna, et cetera. But we also had some other stuff. We had the merge, which moved Ethereum from proof of work to proof of stake. And I would argue that was the biggest catalyst for acceleration of enterprise adoption of blockchains. Because if you're a public company, you've got carbon neutral targets, you've got net zero targets, you've got stakeholder engagement, you've got stakeholder up the yin yang. And like, listen, these are all, I'm not trying to make light of those issues. I'm saying those are important, but also like, it's simply untenable for you to be like, yeah, we're building on a cloud or on a platform that uses 1,000 times more energy than AWS. Like, so the fact that proof of stake networks don't use any more energy really than your average data center per sort of computation is a huge like monkey off the back.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
That's kind of what we're seeing. And, we've like the BRI, the think tank, like our membership over the past 7 years has included a lot of companies. So, I've talked to Coca-Cola, Exxon, and, the government of Canada and CIBC and Manulife and Microsoft and Accenture over the years and even up until today about all these different things. And I would say I'm more excited now about enterprise adoption of public blockchains than I ever have been.
I love it. So it's been an awesome time to spend with you, Alex. Thanks for giving us just like a very, very small view of your wider book, which I think has been terrific. Web3. I just finished it this weekend. Actually, I loved it. Where can folks find that and other info if they want to follow all things Alex?
Yeah, I mean, the book is available wherever books are sold, including on Amazon, which is a good place to start. The best way to buy the book is in massive volume. I want everyone to remember that. The holidays are around the corner. Don't care what God you follow or what religion you belong to. This would make an excellent gift for all your friends and family. So please check it out. You can follow me on Twitter at Alex Tapscott, and LinkedIn. I do some posting, but really Twitter is sort of the main feed. And check out the DeFi Decoded podcast. You can subscribe through the 9 Point YouTube channel. Check it out. We interview great founders and have fun conversations every week.
Awesome. Thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on the next episode.